what is accessibility? What is the point of accessibility? And it's what I've heard throughout my whole career, to be honest. Like, it's not a founder or indie developer niche problem. Like, I get this question from CEOs and government staff and executives literally all the time. So I quickly realized that to get my mission of accessibility out there is not a problem of having the right tool or developers needing to find the right tool, but rather teaching them all the benefits of accessibility to make them understand this is why you need to search for a tool.
Hi everybody, welcome to Ship It and Sip It. This week I'm excited to bring you a special guest and a special topic that we haven't covered yet before on the show. My guest today is Charlie Morris. He is a serial founder, a 5 to 9 indie hacker, and a senior digital accessibility specialist, and much more. And we spend a lot of today's show talking about digital accessibility, what it means, what products or websites do a great job with accessibility, what website builders allow new founders to make very accessible websites using their templates, and the products that Charlie is making to make accessibility easier for all of us to execute correctly, to improve at. As he mentions in the show, it's always a journey that continues. And he's built a lot of tools in this space since he joined the sort of Build in Public community last fall. He talks about his impression of the community, what he's learned on Twitter, on X from other builders, and shares a lot about the tools that he's built. We talk a lot about ally auditing, which is the tool that he's made where anyone can get an accessibility audit that not only gives them a score of their website in terms of how it performs across 20 so metrics, but also informs people about why those scores are given, why those things are important to accessibility, and also to better performance of the website in terms of SEO, because they are closely linked. So I had a great time talking with Charlie about this. And after we talk a lot about accessibility, we also get into he and his partner's other project, which is a mushroom farm, which is also a fascinating startup and a fascinating side of entrepreneurship, aside from the digital realm that we usually cover here on the show. So stick around for that discussion as well. It's very interesting, and I think you'll really love it. With that out of the way, let's get right into the show with Charlie. Charlie, thanks for joining the show. I'm so glad you're here. Let's start off with what have you shipped this week, and why should folks check it out?
Oh, this week has been pretty big for me in regards to ally auditing. So I've just released a tool for automated reports and monitoring for your website, very much focused on accessibility as a lot of what I do is, but pushing in that sort of SEO and user experience in there as well. So that's been a big part of my last couple of weeks.
Yeah, it's a really neat tool. I didn't mention this to you, but I did check it out and used it on Paralect.com's site. And we'll get into that later. I think we got to 70 something. But we'll do a deep dive into accessibility into a little bit. But first, I want to share your journey to this interest and this focus, specialization, if you will. As a sort of arbitrary achievement of mine, you're the first Australian founder I've had on the show. So I'm happy to have you here. But to start out, can you tell us a little bit about the startup or indie hacker or founder scene in Australia there? Are you part of it? Are there meetups going on? What's it like?
Yeah. So particularly, I guess early on in my career, I attended a lot of meetups. I actually kind of owe that meetup space to my entire career to My first job was through these kind of meetups, which was absolutely amazing. I think obviously the pandemic kind of shifted that a little bit, and we saw a bit of a lull there. But I have noticed that it's kicking back up again. Here in Brisbane, there's a lot of local meetup scenes, anything from I host Brisbane Tech Newbies, and so people just entering the scene, all the way up to like sort of local CTO meetups and things like that as well. So it's really big here. Um, Digitally, I see less Australians on X and things like that.
Yeah.
So I'm excited to see more of those enter the digital scene. But locally, there's a lot.
Cool. And in terms of the tech community there, is it, I guess, is the vibe towards entrepreneurship? Is it towards getting a high paying 9 to 5? All mixed up?
Yeah, we've got a lot of startups here. Here in Brisbane, we literally have a few startup incubators. We've got a couple of the local sort of Australian Shark Tanks are very local in the community, and host hackathons and sort of pitch nights and things like that. So there's definitely a bit of a budding scene. But I think within Australia, there's still very much stick it safe, do your salary, find one of those established startups already and jump in with them. But we've seen a lot of even local and federal state investment into trying to drive innovations and startups here. So it's definitely an exciting place, and particularly fintech. Fintech has been massive here for at least a decade or so, and we've seen a lot of startups through that space. So
Very cool. Well, thanks for the insights. We can talk a little bit more about Brisbane and Australia when we get into the mushroom farm stuff. Right? Just a little teaser. All right. I dug through your career path on LinkedIn, as I do with all my guests, and I'm curious how you honed in on accessibility as your focus. Was it something that was on your radar when you were learning engineering as a young engineer, or was there some specific trigger for that?
yeah, and that's such a brilliant question, because whether it was on my radar as a young engineer, never by accident. It's something I learned very early on within development, is you really have to go out of your way to get education on accessibility. When I first entered the industry, it was through a sort of boot camp situation. So I went for my diploma, and we got about 2 hours on accessibility, which I was pretty aghast about. But then you look at sort of 4 year university degrees, and they might have one unit throughout the whole degree. So it's not an accident that I stumbled into accessibility. At the age of 18, I incurred chronic regional pain syndrome. I have a damaged nerve in my leg due to an operation that went a bit wrong. So previously to getting into uh, technology, I was studying finance, and was going down that route. I suffered this disability, and then over time also got a few chronic illnesses due to what I was going through. And so by the time that I got into technology, it was very much a necessity personally to find a career that would allow me to work remotely and work flexibly. Um, and within about 8 months of booting up Free Code Camp and going through some of their exercises, finding a local boot camp to attend here in Brisbane, and then not getting my diploma because I was offered a full-time job at a startup. I had experienced a phenomenal amount of personal and financial empowerment due to technology and being a developer. I, literally 10 times my income in about 2 years, thanks to tech. And so it became very clear to me the moment that I had any sort of experience here, that I really wanted to get other disabled folk into this space, and make sure that whether they were customers or developers, designers, business owners, that they had access to these systems. So it was always on my radar to learn as much about accessibility as possible. When I later went back as a teacher at this bootcamp a few years later, I rewrote the accessibility curriculum and make sure that that was a priority. Um, and I was very, very privileged in 2020 to receive an operation that helped with a lot of health issues. And simultaneously, at the same time, a incredible accessibility firm reached out to me and said, "Hey, we've been following your journey as a developer. Um, how interested are you in turning accessibility into a full time thing?" So I absolutely jumped at the opportunity, and haven't looked back. And whilst I say that accessibility isn't on the radar for a lot of young engineers, I would be doing a massive disservice not to mention the 20 years of the industry that has come before me and has tried to get that into the curriculum, to get that into HTML and working bodies and working groups, and have been very successful at that.
Yeah, it's a interesting topic, and that's a great story. Thanks for sharing all of that. I guess the topic itself isn't sort of as exciting on X or on social media as like MRR charts and things like that. So, but I hope that by having discussions like these and what you've done so far to increase the curriculum and help teach new engineers, we can sort of raise more awareness for it. So we'll get into the details on accessibility in a minute. But just in terms of your own story, let's continue into your own building path. So have you always sort of wanted to build your own products on the side outside of the 9 to 5? You just mentioned on Twitter that you're going to spend the weekend, at least some of it, working on new ideas and new projects. So what got this started? And yeah, tell us a little bit about the products that you're working on.
Yeah, so I guess it's not. I thought that it was this massive thing that I jumped into last October. And I thought that it was all very new and big. But the more time that I've been in this space, the more I look back at it and I'm like, oh, no, I actually did build that ages ago. And I'm actually just linking that up here. And a lot of what I've done is just sort of projects that I've built internally, and used for my own tools or processes. And I've now tried to get them out a bit wider. And I guess the real trigger point for that is, and I'm sure we'll dive more into the mushrooms later, but my partner and I co-founded a mushroom farm in about September last year. And for years, we had been talking about all of my partner's talents within that mushroom space, how much they were doing in their current role and the skills and experience they had. And this idea that, in a couple of years, you would be 100% in the best position to be founding a company and building products and growing mushrooms. And then we were left in a very fortunate position where we had to decide in about 48 hours whether we wanted to start this mushroom farm or not. And Soph just absolutely jumped into it. It has been by no means easy, but any challenge that they've encountered or we've encountered has just been a brilliant learning opportunity in being uncomfortable, picking up new skills and that sort of stuff. So it became very clear to me that if you look at the skill set that you have, 2 to 3 years is always the perfect time to get a few more skills and build on that and be absolutely perfect to be launching products and launching companies. But you'll get to 2 or 3 years time and you could just give it another 2 or 3 years to pick up and build those skills. So it became really clear to me with how much Soph had just jumped straight into it and the success that they had, that I had all those skills. I had even some of these products already built, and it was just a matter of jumping into it, figuring out there's still 99% I don't know, but that's how I'm learning it and applying it as I go along. So yeah, yeah. So starting to farm was really the jump off point for those products.
Really cool. Yeah, I think you're definitely the first founder as well who has been inspired by a mushroom farm to start building products
It
online.
normally goes the other way, right? You
Yeah,
build the
yeah,
products to get the farm,
yeah,
and go live in the woods
yeah,
is the
yeah.
common trope.
All right. So, in terms of the products that you're building, let's just run through them real quick because I found you via, I think the first product I found of yours was Color Easy, the color palette picker that you launched sort of last November, December,
December,
something
yeah,
like.
yeah.
Yeah. Um, there's the auditing, which you already mentioned, and I'm missing some. Help me out. What else have you launched so far?
Yeah, yeah. Well, we'll go through it chronologically, I guess,
Okay.
because
Yeah.
as I
Yeah.
said, I just jumped into Twitter and X in October last year, about a month after starting the farm, because I was like, I've seen Soph do it, and I know that it can be done in the digital space as well. And so I jumped onto Twitter and pretty quickly discovered this build in public community of brilliant founders. And I was simultaneously building out the tech that we needed at the farm. Your databasing systems to calculate the yields coming off of things and that sort of stuff. And whilst doing that, I needed a QR code generator. Um, and so I'd seen a lot of people, just building things and launching it very quickly, a few days, getting it out there. So my first project was actually, and all of these are still live. They get a few users and that sort of stuff. But my first one was called Quirkly, which was a QR code generator. Because I went, oh, I'm having this problem as a founder. Other people will have this problem. I think that's now what the community refers to as poor market research.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's about 100 of these out there, and doing it from the point of accessibility. When people at that point on my Twitter journey were asking, "What is accessibility?" It became pretty clear that wasn't a long-term sort of project. So that's when I was like, okay, let's really think about this and what do I bring that's quite unique to these founders and these builders that they're looking for. And obviously accessibility was a thing. And there's so many brilliant designers on X that I really just so much respect for. That sort of build in public idea when you are literally posting your work up to be critiqued and roasted every day is like that's a brilliant way of working. And so that's where I was starting to look at Color Easy, which is a color palette generator from the point of accessibility. And that's had a fair bit of success. We have a few users coming through there. And that was a real good lesson in really trying to productize the other side of things. So like the SEO and all of the things that you don't know when you work inside of an organization. And you suddenly have to do everything. That was a good exercise in that. But if I'm being honest, I think that's what the community would call poor founders fit, in the sense that I have so much respect and admiration for these designers. I'm not a designer. Um, and so I'm still putting a lot of focus and energy into Color Easy, but listening to a lot of designers along the way, and trying to figure out how I can actually make that useful for them instead of just trying to sneak accessibility in there somewhere. And so in that, I also have released a free tool for Product Hunt that allows you to find indie, bootstrapped, and solo projects only. A little Chrome extension that's free and launched fully hosted through Momentum IDE, which
Cool.
was an absolutely really cool experience because I'd launched Color Easy through Momentum before, and it removes such a large part of your workflow, and you can just get it done. but I really found the power there for Indie Filter, which was literally just this like, I have a free tool. I just want to get it out to people. I don't want to, I'm not making money off this.
Yeah.
So I just want it out. And so that was brilliant to just throw Indie Filter out there. But along this journey, the number one question that I had as I was building was still, what is accessibility? What is the point of accessibility? And it's what I've heard throughout my whole career, to be honest. Like, it's not a founder or indie developer niche problem. Like, I get this question from CEOs and government staff and executives literally all the time. So I quickly realized that to get my mission of accessibility out there is not a problem of having the right tool, or developers needing to find the right tool, but rather teaching them all the benefits of accessibility to make them understand this is why you need to search for a tool. And so alley auditing has been a real sort of collation of all the tools that I use internally, mixed with all of the advice that I give through my independent accessibility as a service firm, Inclusium, trying to mix all of that together to say, this is why accessibility is important, because it impacts your SEO and your design and your performance. And I've seen a lot more now of people engaging with this and instantly challenging themselves. Giving it that score kind of gamifies it as well. So people are challenging for that 100% on the leaderboard, which nobody has yet. So I'm very excited I've seen people keep moving up and up and up, but nobody's quite got there yet.
Is it possible, or have you like programmed in a cap at
99
point?
So, and this is one of the great things. Like, alley auditing is acting as a great case study for alley auditing right now, in the sense that I developed it as a sort of test-driven development through alley auditing. Before I released it, made sure it had 100% on alley auditing. And it's the fastest any of my projects have ever been indexed on Google. I'm getting search impressions from literally the second day. It's the highest engagement rates that I've got on even projects I've worked for on clients and things like that. So you can get 100%. I've got 100%, and it's been very beneficial.
All right. Well, that's a great synopsis of all the things you've launched so far. And before we get deep into accessibility and answer that question, what is it? Why is it important? Just could you touch on your motivation a little bit? So what drives you to build these processes, aside from what you sort of covered already, which is these were things that you're using already that you just want to bring to the world? Do you want more financial freedom? Is this personal interest? Is it just curiosity? Is there anything else there that motivates you?
Yeah, that's I think the biggest question that I've tried to make sure I have alignment with everything that I work on. Being so busy, burnout is such a worry that I think one of the biggest ways to go against that is to make sure you have alignment in what you're doing. So the alignment for me really is accessibility. It's going to sound so cliche, but I'm going to admit it anyway, that the privileges that I've benefited from in accessibility is why I have the job I have, why I'm working on the projects I work on, why I do the community stuff that I do. Everything is because I want people to not be in the situation that I was in, and to instead have all of the benefits and financial empowerment and social empowerment, healthcare, all of these things that having access to websites gives you, has been the driving motivator. I could do that at my 9 to 5 forever. I'm very privileged that I have a large amount of impact on accessibility in my day job. So the question then became, why are you doing this by yourself, and why are you building independently? And I think that comes down more to where I see the gaps in accessibility education. And so it's really kind of left for these large teams and organizations that I've worked in and helped grow and things like that. But on the ground level, it's a lot less talked about, which also means that people that could really benefit from it just have no idea about it whatsoever. And when you're talking with these larger organizations, they have to have some form of benefit if they're going to release accessibility materials for free and to drive all of that and that sort of stuff. So Inclusium, which was the accessibility firm that I have and have been running and have clients in Canada and Australia and work with people in England as well. And that's startups to government organizations. The big purpose of that was to be able to start writing articles and releasing tools for free. So even Ali auditing, there is a paid tier that gives you sort of automated reports straight to your inbox every day, every week, and extended recommendations for how to fix things and stuff like that. But it's important to me that original report and being able to get a full understanding of the accessibility on your website is always available to people, and accessibility is actually accessible to people. So that's something that I find is much easier to do when I'm kind of in control of that bottom line. And so yeah, that's a large one for me is just making sure that accessibility gets out there. And larger organizations are doing a really good job of that these days internally.
Awesome. Well, let's get into sort of what it is and maybe how smaller startups, earlier stage startups, smaller teams, solo founders can know more about it and do their websites and products in a better way. So, can you start with 2 or 3 well-known major sites or products that do accessibility very well, and how do you know that?
Yeah, that's such a brilliant question. Again, I think there's. I'm now thinking government organizations, smaller startups, larger content. Well, we'll start with the larger content. This, I guess, this might sound a bit out of field, but Bandcamp is absolutely amazing in accessibility, I think, because they really accepted the content created by users. They put a lot of effort very early on in guiding users through how to put out album art and transcriptions for songs and audio descriptions and things like that. They really guided their initial users through that process really well. And so you look at Spotify and things like that, and since AI has come out, they've all had this massive jump in capabilities of accessibilities. Now podcast transcripts and captioning tools are everywhere. But Bandcamp, I think, really took an early display to that. And that was just seen by like just that entire user flow. There wasn't this idea of like, we're going to make it just work for screen readers behind the scenes, but rather as it asked you for information, like, would you like to add an image alt? It explained why that was important. And why you should actually do that as opposed to just saying, fill this out. So yeah, for user created content, we now see YouTube, Spotify, all of them have these these really great captions and things like that. But Bandcamp was really good early on in that space. And then for startups, I've been talking with Supabase recently, who are an open source databasing company, and they obviously have their paid tier, and they're venture capitalist backed. So normally you have this idea of that's when the bottom line is sometimes controlled the most, maybe for venture capitalism, or it's where you get to throw away money the most. I'm unsure where Supabase sits. All I know is that when I was setting up my project through them for the first time recently, it just became very intuitive on where to find everything, because they had just a really solid understanding of. They obviously have a very good design library, and when something is put up on their website, it's really done for a reason. Nothing looks out of place. The navigation is really clear. With that said, there's still a few HTML elements and semantic accessibility elements that come to an issue. But most clearly was when I messaged left a comment on the CEO's Twitter profile saying, "Hey, I've got a couple suggestions here. Could I message you?" And he was like, "Yeah, sure." And one of the suggestions I made was this idea of, when you go into the quick started guide area, why is it that I can't actually, like when I get into your docs, why is there no real easy, here's 5 sentences of how to set it up in your project? When I go in your docs area, there's all of these information, but I have no idea where to start. And the next day I went to that docs page and there was a very clear get started for JavaScript, Next.js, all of the different frameworks. And I think that's when you know when a company is doing accessibility well and will do accessibility well, is when they don't take feedback as direct criticism, but understand accessibility is a constant journey and just act on that feedback really, really quickly. And then I guess finally, and people will say this one is boring, I think, but for people that want to learn about accessibility and how to apply it, the BBC in the UK is absolutely unparalleled for the resources that they put out. They have full accessibility style guides, component libraries. They've put their work into making accessibility not just seen through their actual webpage, but able to be replicated by others.
Very cool. Great examples. Let's see. I want to ask about one thing that you've mentioned a couple of times now, and you just mentioned it there, where accessibility is sort of a continuous journey. And from my perspective, since I don't have a great grasp of the topic, can you share a little bit about why that is? Like, say I take my website to Alley Auditing, I get an 85, I work on it to get it up to a 95, and then will it be a 95 forever? Will something change in the site or the web, or why isn't that sort of a static thing?
Yeah, and I think it's twofold. The destination, and I say this as a person with disability, the destination is so hard to achieve, with every other sort of business priority, time, and everything else like that, that if you were to sit down and do that journey in one step, it can take a lot of time. It can take a lot of effort. And I think we love this idea of ship fast, build fast, and all of that sort of stuff. So there's a level of pragmaticness in it, in the same way that you don't sit there and get all of your SEO done in one day and say it's done. You understand that this is something that is achievable, and this is something we can do, and we're going to move towards that. The other side of it is, I said before that as a person with disability, this is how I feel. That is one individual within a massively diverse dysphoria that requires a fair amount of intersectionalism and is not limited to just a physical disability or just cognitive disabilities, or to do with income or geography or these things, but it's a real mixture of everything. And so alley auditing at the moment, if you get 100% on there, that's a really great sign that you're doing a lot of things quite well for certain subsections of users. But to say that this is the destination and we're going to get here is to say that there is a universal sort of accessibility requirement that we can hit. And not only is that non-existent, but they also kind of clash sometimes. So even the idea of, everyone's working remotely now, so webcams are really good for that sort of face-to-face talking. It really, really benefits people that may be hard of hearing and use sort of lip reading to keep a grasp on the situation. They're also a nightmare for people with neurodivergence that hate looking at people in the eye or looking at themselves while they're talking. So to say that once we've got this, it's going to be accessible for all users, I don't want to make it sound impossible, but it's much easier to look at it as a journey of this is what we're aiming for. Now that we're here, let's go listen to more people with disability and see how we're doing and keep working on it.
Awesome. That's very informative. Thank you. And you mentioned on Inclusium Digital, you have a lot of content, a lot of great blog posts there. And the one that I read through when I was making this outline was about the top 3 accessibility issues and how to fix them. We don't have to go through all 3 of them here. I will put a link to the blog post in the show notes for this. Go check it out. It's a great post. There's lots of great content there. I did want to ask, just for my personal interest, about the one of the 3, though, which is alt text for images. Because I spend a lot of my working time and even my personal time posting on social media for across multiple platforms. Anyway, alt texts are everywhere. Every platform almost, I think, has the option to add them. I skip them a lot, I'll admit it. Just because it's a time thing. So is this something that I should just set aside the time to do on every quick tweet I post? Or is this something that, like, you should definitely have it on your website? You should definitely have it on sort of evergreen blog posts. But if it's just a stupid selfie on Twitter from the gym, don't worry about it, John. Like, where should my line be here?
Oh, I'm going to be honest. No matter where you draw the line, there are going to be people that disagree with this. I think that it's about a matter of intent, and how useful that picture is. So that idea of should all of my pictures on my website have alt text, or should all of my pictures on Twitter have alt text? No, not even on your website. It's about whether that picture is actually useful, or is it just adding more noise to what's going on? And so a big thing about accessibility is providing equivalent experiences and options. So equivalent not being equal and the same, but reaching that same outcome with the same amount of effort and the same amount of barrier, hopefully none, for all users. And so when there's a big jump towards let's add alt text to every single image, and now that AI is here, suddenly that barrier of, I can't be bothered to describe every image, that becomes a lot easier. So now you just chuck it everywhere. But you're right, that selfie of you at the gym, like, you added that to let people know you were at the gym. But your post also says that. So what have you added to your post by repeating that again in an image alt text? So when it comes to these tweets, and particularly we know engagement on social media goes much better when you add a picture or add a video or a GIF. So people do that just to decorate it. If it's decorative, leave the alt text out. Save yourself the time for when you do need to apply it, which is when it's informative, when it's important. And even then, you'll find it takes so much less time than you think when you focus on that idea of what's the point of this image. And normally it's text of image, so that'll be your alt text. You copy that straight out. It might be a screenshot of your website, which again, is it important that that's there if you've mentioned everything in your text? If it is, what's important is probably that new feature you just released. So just say that it's a screenshot about that feature. You don't need to list everything inside it. If a user relying on a screen reader was that interested in your website, they'd go check it out and see what it actually looks like. So with image alt text, on a HTML level, make sure you mark it up as decorative. If it's decorative, you do that with just an empty alt tag. Else, make sure it's meaningful. If it's just a picture of you, John, then on your blog, then you just say that it's a picture of you. You don't need to say that you're wearing this shirt and you're with this background or all of that sort of stuff. If it's a picture of you accepting an award, definitely mention you're accepting an award, but we don't need to know what the background looks like.
All right.
So image alt, people very overthink it and they make it way too long. Do less of it, create less noise for screen readers, and focus on what's important.
Awesome. That's really helpful. Thank you. I guess let's stick with alt text just for another second. In terms of blog posts, because I also publish quite a few of those. In general, let's be honest, they don't add a ton to the main blog post. The point of it is to have an OG image for sharing on social media and to on the main page of the blog so that there's some graphic. It could be abstract shapes, it could be gradients, it could be cartoon figures doing whatever with an interface. But everything's in the text in general. So in those cases, do you have a quick recommendation?
Yeah, in that case, you've added these images to make things nicer and easier on the eyes for your sighted audience. If you mark that up with alt text, you're not making things easier or nicer for a screen reader audience. So we'll mark that up as decorative. And blogs and articles are a really good example of simplifying things down. And that we already have an image and then we have a caption underneath. Like if you look at any newspaper, you'll see an image. And if it's important, there's a little caption describing who's in it or what's going on in it. Else, it's no caption, marked as decorative. And so when it comes to blogs and articles, I would say that if it's meaningful enough to have an alt description on it, then you should probably describe it for all users and actually put a proper caption on it. And if you can't justify that proper caption, it's probably decorative.
Okay. That made me think of another question. Do you want to talk about alt text more?
Yeah, okay. Go for it.
Okay, so sticking with the topic, the blog topic, let's go the other way. If you've got some inline images that have a lot of information, there are charts with just rows, whatever. It's important to the topic of the article. It has a function, but it also has a lot of information. How do you go about displaying that in an alt text? Do you have to write it all out line by line, try and describe it? What's your recommendation there?
Yeah, and that's definitely a tough one because particularly when we're talking about these sort of online content, it might not be created by a developer. Like I can't just say make that chart accessible to a keyboard. you've got a lot of brilliant people creating blogs and things just straight through Substack and things like that, and then they're taking these infographics over. Um, that is where it gets a bit harder. Um, you can, of course, try and get that a bit natively in your body copy. If you've got a graph in your article, then hopefully it's there for a reason. You haven't just chucked it in. So you should be providing a fair bit of context surrounding it. And then past that, we're getting back to that point of how can we mark this up in an equivalent manner. So that might possibly be at the bottom of the article, having those graphs in a table form, or having those graphs linking to another website where you got them from, where they might be in that accessible format. But really, it's about that more holistic point of accessibility, where if that graph is there for a good reason, then you should be able to put it into a table view at the bottom for anybody that wants further context. But you've addressed the main points of it in that article body content. And so the alt text might say something about referring to that table at the bottom if they want some more information, instead of trying to load all of that table information into an alt text that doesn't have that semantic formatting. And again, you've included that chart so a sighted user can quickly glance over things and get a good synopsis of what's going on. Including all of that in an alt text does not provide that to a screen reader user.
Okay, cool. All right. Thanks for the mini deep dive on alt text. That's very useful. Hopefully people who write a lot of content will find some new info there. We talked quite a bit about the alley auditing tool. Let's wrap up that side of it. I did check Paralect.com, our company website there, and we got a 73%. So can you give us sort of a range? What is okay? What's good? What's better? Obviously, 100% is possible, and it's the
best.
But
yeah.
And my second question with that is like, I don't know how many criteria there. It's like 25 or something.
26 at the moment. Yeah.
Are some of those more heavily weighted, more important than others? And
Yeah. So that's the next deployment actually coming out to alley auditing, is adding a bit more weight to those scores and explaining what barriers impact more people, or what barriers might have a larger impact on maybe a smaller subset of users. So at the moment, you're doing pretty well if you're sitting around that 70% mark, 70-80% mark. We've had a lot of websites score 50 to 60. I think our lowest is about 35% at the moment, which once you start getting down that low, it's much more of a functional issue than an accessibility issue. But as I've mentioned before, nobody's hit 100% yet. So you've got some time to make up. I think our leaders are around 86%. But when we get a few people around 86%, that's where that weighting kind of becomes more important, because those sitting at 86% aren't all the same level of accessible. Some of those tests in there, for example, you have your OG meta testing and things like that. That's about improving your SEO, and it does that by making it more accessible to outside audiences, how it's displayed on other platforms, and it makes it more accessible to computers and search engines, obviously. If you're missing that, but you never share your website on a social media website, it doesn't really impact anything. Whereas the skip to main content link, which is the idea that the first interactive element on a web page, if you press tab when you first get to a web page, it should be a little hidden skip to main content link. And so if you're navigating on keyboard, you should be able to press tab, enter, and then you're straight into the main content of the page if you're navigating using a keyboard or a screen reader. And so those are massive subsets of users. Um, you don't have to be using a screen reader to need to use a keyboard. Many people with just situational or temporary disabilities are much more likely to use a keyboard. Um, there are just people that your mouse is broken, and good luck getting around that doc's website to figure out how to fix it. And the skip to main content link, the purpose of that is bypassing the 150 navigation links that are there on every page. So when that's not there, users can still use your website, but everything now takes 2 hours longer for 80% of your disabled users. That's obviously so much more important than if your title has a typo in it or if it's descriptive enough. And so there are definitely what's referred to in the industry as your low hanging fruits, things that you can kind of get in front of right at the beginning of your journey that have a massive impact to the rest of your users as well. And I think in the build in public, that's called the 80-20 rule, right? If you could put 80% of your effort, then the 20% that can take a bit longer to get there. So yeah, the next deployment will have those weightings and that level of prioritization.
Very cool. So yeah, I recommend anybody with a website to go get their audit done at Alley Auditing. The first one or three are free, I believe.
Three, yeah, the first
Yeah.
three are free. Yeah.
Super. All right. Another question I just thought of when you were describing that there is about the low code, no code website builders. You mentioned you used Momentum, but there are other bigger, more popular ones, Framer, Webflow, et cetera, et cetera. Are those platforms just automating a lot of this for people? Are there ones that just the templates are better in terms of accessibility? What's going on there?
Yeah. And maybe you should get a sponsor out of this. But one of the very interesting things that I've learned from Alley Auditing was a customer reaching out to say, "Hey, could you double check these audit results? Because this website that I paid a professional development team $7,000 for performs so much worse than this standard Wix template that I am using for another project." And I looked into it and did some manual testing. And sorry to say to this bloke, but he would have been better off with that Wix template in regards to accessibility. So the there is a lot of work being done, I know, from Wix, Squarespace, all of these larger companies to try and make it their products by default as accessible as possible. A large point of this is the other side of what they promise their users, which is really good search engine results and performance and that sort of stuff, which goes hand in hand with good accessibility. Um, Unfortunately, with that said, that is one of the reasons why I pointed at Bandcamp before as a great example of user generated content, because there's a lot that you can do within these templates that will break accessibility and are pretty clear to the owners of these templates will break accessibility, but they don't let you know that. And that's one of the things that I was trying to catch with Alley Auditing is a lot of these really big sites can be quite accessible by default, and remove a lot of the noise that you need to. But without that added accessibility experience, it's really hard to detect when you've made just slightly the wrong change on these platforms.
Interesting. All right. So that's very helpful. Hopefully, yeah. So basically, with the no code builders, if you're building in Framer from a template, you have to work to sort of screw it up.
For Framer, I'm unsure.
Okay.
I can't say
Yeah.
specifically Framer, but in general, a lot of these platforms, even Momentum, for example, as you put in the different content, those cards naturally they have the correct headers to them and things like that. Whereas if you were actually developing your own website, you might say that like, oh, I need the heading to be this size, and apply some custom CSS
Yeah.
or choose the wrong thing. So these websites and platforms make it so much easier to get it right. And in getting accessibility out there and making it accessible, I love what these companies are doing, because yeah, if 50% of the internet is built on WordPress, then if I can just make WordPress a bit more accessible, that will have so much more of an impact than going out and fixing 50 different websites.
Right, right. Cool. One more question about accessibility, then we'll move on to mushroom farming and wrap up. I don't want to take too much of your time. If we think about a sort of prototypical small startup team, the ones that we have here at Paralect, when a founder comes to us, usually one designer, a couple developers, a product and project manager. Who sort of owns accessibility on that team, and who's responsible for making sure that the product is deployed in an accessible way?
Oof. The ownership is very different to who's contributing. Everybody should be contributing. And that's because accessibility is a very wide lens. As I said, I'm not a designer. That designer will give me some really good tips about accessibility that I didn't know coming from, say, a technical engineer background. And even the customer success manager will have so much more insight onto what are real barriers to our customers right now. But as to ownership, I'm maybe being a bit controversial, but accessibility specialists. If your team is that small, then unfortunately it's going to kind of fall to whoever has the biggest interest in accessibility, which I might add is probably the person with a disability or a chronic illness. And so now that's just their responsibility to fight for themselves and others. Less than ideal. So I think it's about trying to actually get an accessibility specialist in. If you're an early stage startup, of course, you can't afford one of those full time. That's where hopefully things like Inclusium and other sort of part-time resources come into place to help as much with that. But yeah, that whoever's as high up as possible should be owning it, because it just has so much breadth to it. Everybody should be responsible for it. But we have to be really careful that by making it everybody's responsibility, we don't end up with actually no owner to it.
Yeah. Okay, that's a good perspective. I guess, yeah, we won't dwell on that too long. All right, let's move on. Let's move on. And at the conclusion, if you have any other sort of parting words about accessibility, feel free to add them. Let's talk about the mushroom farm. You already told us a little bit. You launched it sort of last fall, you and your partner. I'm fascinated by this for two reasons. First, I grew up on a farm, so the land is always near and dear to my heart. And later, I was a chef in a restaurant where we sourced as much as possible of our ingredients from local farmers like yourselves. So it's new, but you also posted that it's growing and it's quite successful. I checked out some of the Instagram posts about it. So, and you posted on LinkedIn about it as well. So, why mushrooms, I guess?
I wish that I could say that I all my life have loved mushrooms and it's been this lifelong dream and that sort of stuff. I didn't know anything about mushrooms up until about 4 years ago, 4 or 5 years ago, where I met my partner Soph, who had very recently decided that their entire life was devoted to gourmet mushrooms, and they had essentially been an art curator and an art gallery owner. And then the pandemic hit, and kind of changed a lot of that space. And they spent a lot more time in their garden growing food, which they had always been absolutely massive on. They're from a very large Italian family. When I say I know nothing about mushrooms, they spent their Sundays, making the pasta sauce and the pasta from scratch, and they know everything about all of their fruits and vegetables. And so as they were spending some more time in the garden, they discovered a local company that was doing these sort of mushroom grow kits and that sort of stuff, and found a Facebook community and their own version of Build in Public, of people that were essentially growing really beautiful, like fine dining gourmet mushrooms out of buckets in their house and things like that. So I am quite grateful that I met them after this period. My spare bedroom has never been a mushroom grow room, thankfully. But they very quickly just flew straight into it full time and found a local farm that was growing mushrooms. And essentially, the great thing about building or growing in public is by the time you find that opportunity that you love, you get to say, here's everything I've been doing, give me a job. And yeah, they did that for up until last fall. Were working for this company, started from just, I say company, it's a startup as well, as is most of the gourmet mushroom industry. Starting from learning how to sort of grow mushrooms and harvest mushrooms for fine dining restaurants, all the way to sort of how to create those cultures and lab work and larger farm stuff as well. So they have a massive team there that sells these beautiful grow kits that you can literally just pull off the box and mist once a day, and you have like gourmet mushrooms growing in your kitchen. And essentially, last year they decided that whilst they loved growing fresh mushrooms, they actually wanted to devote their full time to all of these mushroom supplies and assisting this absolutely budgeting massive startup farm culture that's happening here in Australia. And so my partner went to work one day and came home at the end of the day and said, hey, next week they're selling the farm, and I won't have a job. But they did ask me if I wanted to buy it. And as I said, we had discussed for years this idea of you're always just 2 or 3 years away. Right. And it became pretty clear pretty quickly that it was either now or in 2 or 3 years' time, maybe we get started, but this opportunity would never be the same. And so within a week, we said, yep, we will buy all of your farming assets off you. We will move essentially 400 meters down the road, start our own mushroom farm and invest our entire life savings and see how we go. And I guess to back it up just slightly, when I say farm, it is not what you're imagining. Mushrooms are not grown the way that most people imagine, I don't think. And it's certainly not this fun little forest forage that happens. But essentially, my partner loves mushrooms because they love fresh food. They love working with chefs like you were, and seeing it hit the plates and things like that. I love working with mushrooms because I look at how they grow and I say, this is how we're going to grow food on Mars. Like we have these massive retrofitted refrigerated shipping containers that are fully kitted out with all of your climate control, humidity control, more sensors than you can ever imagine to name. And that's where these mushrooms grow year round. So it's current average temperatures of about 30 degrees Celsius here at the moment. And these mushrooms grow much, much closer to between 15 and 19 degrees Celsius. And sometimes into like 95% humidity.
Hmm.
So they're in these very strict climate controlled containers. And it really is a beautiful merge between the fresh food and the farming that my partner loves and the technology and the automation that I'm really excited about.
Very cool. I guess in terms of mushrooms, it's quite popular here to go and forage for them in the forests in late summer, early fall. I've done it a couple times. We only collected chanterelles because they're just about the only bright orange one that has a particular shape. There's very little there's very little risk of sort of getting a poisonous one by
Yeah.
accident and having a really bad time. Um, but oh, I guess connected with this on X, there is a sort of startup corner of builders that really celebrates these types of offline businesses, sort of sweaty startups and all of that stuff. In the United States, it seems to be like car washes and storage units are big. I guess just
Yeah, yeah.
in
And
terms of cash flow, but
pool pool guys and HVAC people as
yeah,
well
yeah,
is
yeah.
what I've seen a lot of. Yeah.
So I guess since you joined Axe last fall, have you been sort of found new inspiration there for other people who are taking this path?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. The name that immediately sprang to mind was Cody Sanchez. And so I think she termed the coin, you used the phrase sweaty startups. She uses the exact opposite, which is boring businesses.
Okay.
And so it's this idea of just, your brick and mortar, your things like maybe it's a laundry store or maybe it's a mushroom farm or these things that may on surface not seem that glamorous, but they exist everywhere in a profitable business model because they're essential, because they provide real value to society. And so we, particularly within the tech and dev scene, like we want to be the next unicorn or the next billion-dollar startup and things like that. But Cody Sanchez has this real mentality of 1 mil to 10 mil. If you've got that in a business, you you're doing well. If you can do that in a profitable manner, you're doing really, really well. You don't have to be the next unicorn. In fact, if you can get 1 to 10 million, you can replicate that so many more times than you could replicate the $1 billion rush. But people don't want to look at it like that because it is less. We're all building in public. There seems to be less fame involved in it and things like that. But her entire personal brand is this boring business, proving that actually there's not that much boring about them.
Yeah, yeah.
And yeah, I guess the other side would be Peter Askew, who I think on Twitter is search bound. He is a bit of an intersection between technology and farming. He owns onions.com, and has an onion farm. And I think he's been in technology, I think, longer than I've been alive, but has again really pushed that idea of the ideas that he was working on 20 years ago are the ones that are really successful now. And not everything is an overnight success, particularly when you're building brick and mortar. It's about sustainable growth and trying to not just experiment, but do so in a way that you probably have to be a bit safer than A/B testing a new web page. So, but I would say that a lot of those people, when you get more into that sweaty startup space, I think that you run into a bit of a problem with work-life balance. I think there's a lot of kind of toxic masculinity in that space. And one of the things I really love about building public is that real honest vulnerability and that idea of, oh, I didn't actually do so well this week, either financially in my business or just personally, or just I feel a bit lethargic or I'm just not there right now. Whereas I see that a bit less in that sort of physical business space.
Hmm.
Um, and I don't know if maybe that's the LinkedIn culture kind of leaking through there. But yeah.
Maybe. All right. One more question. Since you mentioned earlier how the mushroom farm connected to also to your tech expertise, as it has grown, and I assume you're selling to more places, you're communicating with more buyers. Um, have you noticed any gaps there in terms of tools that you can use to communicate and distribute the products sort of locally? Because I remember when I was in the kitchen, we were just sort of calling the farms, and we would get handwritten invoices from these, small solo grow operations. So, anything like mushrooms as a service on the radar or something like that?
Mushrooms. Yeah. So I think in regards to those texting your local farmer, I think that will always be a thing. It used to be written notes. Now we use customer management tools and things like that. But we will always, I think, have much better success when we can just text and email, or more importantly, have them come out to the farm. We go out to the restaurant. Food and mushrooms is and you would know this as a chef, like you want those locals, you want the people that you can trust and have a relationship to. So distribution is hard to scale, which is obviously, I just described a very profitable problem to solve. um, I don't have so many ideas around that. um, we have a lot of ideas, and I'll have to be a bit more quiet now, and not give too much away. But there's a few ideas that we have more in regards to distribution and things like that. When we work with sort of fresh mushrooms, or any produce, shelf life becomes a big problem very quickly, and distributing that widely becomes a bit of a problem. But also, I don't think that too many people want to eat a mushroom grown in another country. They would much prefer to just eat a mushroom grown by someone local that is just a text message away.
Right.
So I think there's a lot of room to do in this space around getting locals even more connected, and removing the barriers there, as opposed to this sort of global
Right.
distribution problem. But there is Karl Popper on X that is doing. I know that he has a really cool sort of like menu as a service creation tool that he's had a lot of success with, contacting restaurants and building that client base there.
Hmm.
So I know there's a few people doing really exciting stuff in this space.
Yeah, it's really cool. All right, let's wrap up then. We already covered most of your sort of build and public journey and what your impressions were there. I wonder though if there are other sort of developers or professionals out there that are doing the 9 to 5 and they struggle to make time for their own projects. Do you have any advice on? You mentioned burnout earlier, sort of how to juggle it all and maybe how to get started, but to continue it in a sustainable way.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, John, didn't you know it's easy to just have it all and do it all and just no. I think it's something you have to be really honest with yourself about. Burnout is 100% real. I'm a big believer that it's real. It's happened to me before. Um, so instead of just trying to push through forever and say that, I can juggle 1,000 things all at once, I think you have to be honest with yourself, find alignment in what you do. I think that's the easiest way to avoid burnout is make sure you're working on things that you genuinely care about. And I think, yeah, understand that it's not that sweaty startup culture, and if you can see that person on X that is somehow working a job and has 2 side hustles and still goes to the gym every day, then I can guarantee that there's probably 7 other areas in their life that they avoid talking about for a very good reason. So instead, just understand that, yeah, the things that pay off might not be for 2 or 3 years or 20 years, but the only way to keep doing that is to try and find a balance where you're not, pushing yourself 100% and burning out. The other side is if you're working that 9 to 5 and then doing that 5 to 9, is understanding that your side hustle is still your side hustle, probably for, unfortunately, a good reason. And so, making sure that side hustle, you're giving it the care and attention and nourishment that it needs, but not at the cost of your career or your family life or your relationship and things like that. So trying to find that balance is difficult, I admit, particularly when on X you have people like even me this afternoon that are saying, what are you building this weekend?
Right.
But yeah, understanding that you can take a day off, contrary to popular belief, and things probably won't fall apart. And failing that, find really good supportive partners, whether that's in life with Soph or in your business. Sometimes it can be the same person in both roles, different people in different roles, but finding a community, finding partners, and finding collaborators is definitely, I think, the most unfair advantage that you could have trying to do this sustainably.
Yeah, that's a great message. All right, let's wrap up with that tweet that you just mentioned. You did tease there that you were working on something new. What are you working on this weekend? And what are you excited for people to find out about soon from you that maybe you haven't mentioned, maybe you already mentioned it?
Yeah, so I think my main focus for quite a while is going to be alley auditing.
Okay.
I'm still, there's close to 50 to 100 users on there every day at the moment. So I really want to keep trying to provide that value to them. We're going to have some better reports coming out, including directly which code, like straight up your code segment swapped out, how to fix it, one and done, for Next.js and HTML. I've had a few people mention Framer as well, so some extra recommendations coming in for that. As well as a bunch of free resources. So I've got, I think it's about 18 articles at the moment about the tests that are run, why they're important, and why you need them as well. So that's all coming out very soon. That'll be a lot of my weekend. But this is a part of that balance game, and that actually a larger part of my weekend, I think, will be working on some client work for Inclusium, and going to harvest some mushrooms. So that's been at least 1 day a week for me at the moment, has been trying to go in directly to the farm and get that more hands-on experience, to understand what's going on. So
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Charlie. This has been a really informative conversation. I learned a ton. I hope everybody who watches it learns a lot as well. Great job on your first podcast. It's been really great meeting you and
Thank you.
talking with you. Thanks so much.
Thank you, John. No, thank you for having me. It's been great.